Well, here with us now is North Carolina Congressman Ted Budd. Congressman Budd, thank you so much for joining us. I know you've called on the U.S. to stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel, and particularly your House colleagues to have its back. Congressman Budd, what prompted that call?
Well, you look at the tension right now between Hamas and Israel, and you just want to compare the two for a moment. When you look at Hamas, you've got a terrorist organization. You've got thousands of rockets being fired at civilians. Hamas says in their founding documents that they want to destroy Israel. But on the other hand, you've got Israel, and they're the only democracy in the Middle East. They're our longtime friend and ally, and they're a force for stability in the region. This really isn't hard, and I just know that the United States needs to stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel.
Congressman Budd, the White House, like you and your fellow Republicans, has said Israel has a right to defend itself. Why does that seem to be in question among some of the president's own in his party?
Yeah, there's a lot. When you look at the squad in the House and how much power and influence they have over the Democrat Party right now, it just seems that otherwise the Democrats of old that may have supported Israel, it seems they're really kowtowing to the radical progressive left, who's at least standing by for the destruction of Israel. We cannot have that, and we have to stand by our ally. They're our great friend in the region. And again, they're a force for stability. What we need Biden to do, we need him to stop pressuring Israel and leaking Biden-Netanyahu phone calls. And they need to also stop the narrative that leads to an equivalence between Hamas and Israel. They're not equivalent. One's a terrorist organization, one's a country. And we realize that the situation will end when Hamas stops firing rockets at civilians.
Congressman, you alluded to this after releasing a pretty even-handed statement earlier this week detailing President Biden's phone call with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Reports indicated the two actually had a much tougher conversation than that readout portrayed. I'd like to get you to weigh in on what your thoughts about this intentional leak by the White House.
Yeah, it's very upsetting. Look, between leaders, they need to keep that confidential. There needs to be an establishment of trust, and it also telegraphs how are we going to handle relationships with other countries. And it just shows that we need some real leadership in this country. We seem to have lost it several months ago, and it's just amazing how fast the Democrats under Joe Biden's leadership can allow things to unravel in this country, whether it's dealing with the Middle East. I mean, we were celebrating the Abraham Accords just a few short months ago, and now things are unraveling. It doesn't matter whether it's more domestically dealing with our border or chaos in the Middle East. We don't have a party of leadership right now.
I know you can't get inside the head of Joe Biden, but why the leak? What benefit does it give?
I think he's saying he's trying to telegraph to Hamas that there's some sort of moral equivalence between the two. And I also think that those who might be the old blue dog Democrats, Joe Biden's been around it's 50 years in Washington, D.C. And he's not the Democrat of old. And so I think he's leaning towards placating the radical left, the squad, if you will, which seems to be very favorable towards Hamas. It's a very uncomfortable position to be in. It's not where the United States needs to be right now.
Congressman Budd, we only have about 30 seconds left, and if I can just squeeze in this last question, even as the conflict moves towards potentially a diplomatic ceasefire, the violence continues. Is there an end in sight?
I think there is. Israel has a very strong military and a great intelligence operation. I know we want to also be on their side. We want them to know unequivocally we will be with them. So I think we need to make sure that we're clear. Don't leak phone calls. Make sure there's a trust between Netanyahu and Biden. So Biden needs to really step up his game and make sure that his administration is trustworthy. I think there will be an end in sight, but they need to make sure that the U.S. has Israel's back.
All right, Congressman Ted Budd, Republican from North Carolina. Congressman Budd, thank you so much for your time today.